Everybody here? Okay. Well, good morning. Hope everyone had a nice evening, and welcome to our third day and final day for this board offsite meeting. We've had some open and candid discussions over the last 2 days, and I'd like to thank my colleagues on the board for your willingness to consider one another's feedback and perspectives with an open mind. Before we get started, we'll hand it over to Marcy for her remarks.
Thank you. And good morning and welcome to the final day of our offsite. I think the last 2 days of sessions have been informative, and I think really we designed the agendas looking at the next 12 months and what we will be bringing forward to all of you, and really trying to provide additional perspective from outside experts. And so we really would like to have your feedback on how well you thought the last 2 days have gone, how the speakers, were the speakers informative, did they provide the right kind of context and perspective for you. And as you know, we're already planning July offsites, so that information would be really helpful to us as we start gathering speakers and agenda items for the offsite. So if you could send those to me directly, that would be quite helpful. So this morning, we are going to get an update on your work with the National Association of Corporate Directors. Kerry Dominguez is here with us today, as well as Ann Simpson. And you all, we had 100% completion on the self-evaluation survey, which Ann is very thrilled about as well. And then we'll close the day with fiduciary training with Ashley Dunning. So just a thank you once again to all of the team and the guest panelists who worked really hard to make sure that this event was successful for all. And I'll turn it back over to the president now to get us kicked off for the day.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Well, let's jump right in, Ann. Take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you. We're going to hear this morning the findings from the board's self-evaluation. But as Marcy said, the critical thing to begin with is that everybody participated. It's very rare in life to be able to say something was 100%. But it was 100% on the surveys and on the interviews. And so I think this morning we've got a wonderful opportunity to hear about the findings, but also about the next steps. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is introduce Kerry Dominguez, who is our esteemed and greatly appreciated faculty member from the National Association of Corporate Directors. Now, I'm glad to say that you have a full biography of Kerry in your packet, so I don't need to go in great and glorious detail through all the accomplishments that Kerry has behind her. I think what's very relevant for the CalPERS board is that not only is Kerry herself a board member of the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is a world-class governance organization with thousands of members in the United States, with 40 years of experience on board evaluation. Kerry brings that. But she also brings tremendous experience in public service. At the Department of Labor and sitting on a task force on innovation and entrepreneurship, and also as a former chair of the Equal Opportunities Commission. And in addition to that, keeping you busy, all these things, Kerry has also sat on many leading corporate boards. So she has a sense of best practice in the private sector, as well as an understanding of how governance should and could work in public sector organizations as well. Finally, I do want to say that Kerry has been recognized as a leader in the field, nationally and internationally. We've quoted some of the most significant awards, but we wouldn't have space on the page for all of them. But Kerry's role as one of the leading elite Hispanic women in the country, and furthermore as one of the 100 most influential Hispanic leaders. These are awards to treasure, but they really speak to Kerry's tremendous reputation in the United States and beyond. So Kerry, we're so grateful that you've done this work for us and that you're joining us here today to share the findings and also the wisdom and experience that you bring on this topic. So let me just briefly cover what we'll cover today. What do we want to get through? We're welcoming 3 new board members today, and so I'm going to just explain the background to this project. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And then Kerry is going to talk about the process. What we do is one thing, but how we did it is very, very important. And Kerry was really at the heart of this. The next part of the discussion is going to be on the findings. What did you, as board members, tell our NACD faculty member through the surveys and through the interviews? And for new board members, we're going to make sure that we open up some opportunities for you to contribute through further conversations with Kerry after this workshop, because we want to maintain this inclusive approach and full participation. The next section, this is arguably the most important. First of all, what did Kerry find by way of CalPERS strengths? What are the things that the board does really well? And Kerry's in a very good position to give some feedback on this, given her very wide experience with so many boards. And then the critical thing is, how do we work on the opportunities that have been identified by you? What are the different issues where we could raise our game, do better, learn from others? We've got quite an exciting list of opportunities that you've identified in the process. And this morning, we really want to have a good debate about that. What are the priorities? What really matters? Have we missed anything in this very rich process of gathering your input? And then, of course, because talk is no good without action, we'll be looking to the board and to our president for direction on next steps. Having learned all of this, what are we going to do about it? So I think that's got us a busy to-do list for this morning's session. We have 2 hours, so we hope that we've got plenty of opportunity for people to weigh in. I will just mention one other point of order, which is that Dana has a flight to catch. So after I've finished this introductory overview, I'll be turning back to our president for comments there. But then we'll be letting Kerry make her full presentation. And unless there's any points of clarification, it's urgent that you ask a question. We're hoping to have the main body of discussion once Kerry's gone through her slides. That will help us keep on track. But do shout if there's something urgent that we need to explain. So let's just recap. What are we doing and why are we doing it? This is the background. It was very nice on Monday to hear from Robert Jackson at the SEC. This is the regulator for the biggest capital market in the world, saying CalPERS' commitment to corporate governance means so much to the regulator and to the markets, and globally we're recognized as leaders in the field. And why does that matter? Well, of all the research we've done, and there's plenty of it, the one thing we know is that governance, how an organization is owned, controlled, directed, how that happens and how well it's done makes all the difference to performance. And this board is laser focused on the performance of CalPERS as an organization. So what we've learned in any setting is that having transparency and accountability, having board effectiveness, is just going to make all the difference to being able to perform to a high level. So governance isn't something that we just do because it's fun, although it can be. It can be very interesting. It's really because it's all about helping CalPERS deliver on our obligations to the members. It's performance in all its aspects. So getting the board governance as good as it can be is going to make that difference. So for that reason, CalPERS has a policy that every 2 years, the board reflects, looks within to see how the governance processes are working. What are we doing? What could we do better? What have we learned? where are best practices going that we could introduce, and most important, get feedback from you, the board members, on what could be done in a better way so that you can be a better board member individually and also together as fiduciaries. So we're glad that we could turn to the National Association of Corporate Directors this time. It's the first time we've used NACD for the board self-evaluation. And thank you to Matt Jacobs. He sits on the board of the North California chapter of NACD. But we have a very high regard for NACD because there's such a body of good practice, wisdom, learning, and insight. And at the back of your deck, you'll see we've got a very nice collection of reading materials and resources so that you can really dip into a lot of good material on topics that come up today. The other thing, though, that is very important with a self-evaluation, and this is best practice, when we're talking to companies, we say, this is how we like you to do it. We want board evaluation, but we want you to have it facilitated. Not just everybody sitting and marking their own exam paper. How did I do this year? I actually did very well, and you know how that goes. But the reflection and the self-evaluation needs to be handled by somebody who's independent, and Kerry is, but is expert, somebody who really knows about this topic and has a lot of experience to draw on. So that's really what we're looking to NACD for independence and for expertise, and help CalPERS know where we are in the CalPERS journey to make sure that our board governance is as effective as possible so that we can have the highest impact on the performance and deliver on our objectives. The final point I want to make before handing back to President Jones is that I'd like to say how much we appreciate working with NACD on this project, because they haven't been able to crank the handle and say, oh, here's another board. CalPERS looks very different to a corporate board. For a start, we don't have shareholders. We don't see the board meeting in private. CalPERS is a fiduciary and a public agency. And the members of our board, some groups are there elected by members, some board members are appointed, and others serve in an ex officio capacity because of the other public service responsibilities they have. So that means we have a very diverse and a very rich array of experience on the CalPERS board. But the issues that we need to address at CalPERS are going to look a bit different. So what we've done is tailor the approach. So if you like, we've taken the NACD garments and we've tailored them to fit CalPERS. And NACD has spent a lot of time making sure that we did this tailoring in the right way, but we wanted to make sure that the approach was relevant. And that required extra time and extra thought, and I'd just like to say how much we've appreciated NACD working with us in that way. So that's plenty by way of introduction. Welcome to Kerry. We're looking forward very much to the findings, and more important, your ideas on how we take this forwards and turn this into something with real action behind it, because it's going to really bring results for CalPERS and for our members who we serve. So, President Jones.
Thank you, Ann. Mrs. Hollinger has to leave to catch a plane, so we want to give her an opportunity to make some comments and share her thoughts before she leaves. Mrs. Hollinger.
Thank you, Henry. As I reflected before I came to the board retreat, I recognize that a lot of us on this board represent different constituencies, different factions, and they all have their respective agendas. And I realized how meaningful it would be for the board to work on a project together. Because what we really haven't been, I think it would have shared unity, a shared vision, a shared sense of collaboration, and ultimately something that we accomplish together. And if we identified one or two, I don't know, from our experts, we'll get what's really doable, I think that would really make an impact on our governance structure and be a positive step moving forward. So I just want Anne and Kerry to know that I really support and fully advance this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Kerry.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Anne, for setting the stage so nicely and for your warm welcome and gracious and generous introduction. And good morning, President Jones and members of the board. I'm really delighted to be here today. Far more delighted than the first time I came, because today I've got the findings. I've got the results of the feedback received from each and every one of you. And so it's an exciting time, and the timing couldn't be better. It's a new year. We have new board members. We have new leadership. We have a new governor. We have a continuously engaged legislature, and certainly from the public's perspective, a growing interest and awareness of the importance of good governance and sound fiduciary care, sound stewardship. So I think all of the stars have come together for this day. And at the outset, let me first and foremost say how much we at NACD appreciated all of the support and the information, guidance that we received from Anne, her team, from the CalPERS management. It really helped inform us and understand the unique governance characteristics that make up this board. So I just want Anne and your team and CalPERS to really say thank you. You have devoted a lot of time. We've been working on this since last July. And so the results, the survey format itself, we hope with our collaborative efforts really reflect and is responsive to your needs and to your interests, and I hope that was successful. So Anne talked about the background. Let me talk a little bit about the process that we used. Oops. Do we have? Guess we don't have the back. Well, I'll speak to the process. But the NACD very much, first of all, and as I've said before, very much appreciated and values the relationship that we have with CalPERS. And as you know, one of the leading practices in good governance has been to every once in a while, engage an outside independent consultant, as Anne mentioned. And I think that what that does is really helps enrich the process because of the confidentiality, because of the candor, because of the trust that somebody from the outside can guide that process and get that input and then feed it back to you in a summary fashion. And I think that's been a leading practice and has been a very successful practice. So we're delighted and very much appreciated the opportunity to work with you in this regard. And of course, CalPERS has been recognized by NACD on multiple occasions for your governance practices, leading by example. So it was a good relationship, has been, and a good connection. So given all that background, we, in terms of the process, a specific process that was used following the introduction last July, when I came and reported as to what we were going to be doing, we then tailored the survey to truly fit the unique characteristics of your board. we wanted to make sure that it captured that, and that's why we devoted so much time and attention and care to making sure that the language in the survey format, the questions, all of that were truly responsive to your needs and interests. And so the survey involved 3 particular areas. The first was the board as a whole. We wanted to make sure that we wanted to understand the effectiveness of the group along key buckets of roles and responsibilities that a board is responsible for, has to carry out. So the first component was the big picture, was the board. Then we took it to the committee level, and from there we took it to the individual member level. Now, the findings that you're about to hear actually permeate across all of them because they're not separate silos. They really are integrated as a board member, as a committee member, as an independent individual. You know, all of these experiences that you have gathered through your service really helped inform and guide what should the next opportunities be for us to address. And so we put together a 3-level survey, as you see there. And then the survey was distributed to each board member for completion. And once it was completed, and thank you for completing it and meeting the deadlines that we had in order to produce the deliverables that we're here to do. That was uploaded onto a secure platform at NACD. Once we gathered that information, then the next step was to do one-on-one interviews. The purpose of the interviews, the discussions, was really to give you an opportunity to build and elaborate on some of the comments that you had made on all aspects of the evaluation. And so those interviews, on average, lasted about an hour. I believe I spent about an hour with each one of you, give or take. A few went over, a little bit over the hour. A few were slightly under. But I think on average, we had a really good process and good time in which we gave everyone an opportunity to comment and elaborate. As Anne mentioned, we're very, very pleased to report that we had 100% participation, both in terms of completing the survey and in terms of the discussions that we had with each one of you. We did get very thoughtful feedback, both in terms of the evaluation as well as the one-on-one conversations. And I believe that all the members felt very comfortable in providing the feedback, and there was a sense of trust and confidence that the independence that this process brought really helped generate that level of comfort and trust in order to enhance the candor and the forthrightness of the process. So again, as Anne mentioned, the whole focus of this evaluation was to identify areas of strength and also identify opportunities for performance. And so if we look at the full board, we start with the full board. There are 5 buckets, if you will, 5 core competencies that you're responsible for as a board member. And this cuts across all boards. And we're going to get into each one of them in greater detail. But we're talking about the whole board structure. Is the board structure in a way that is conducive to good and sound governance? Operational oversight, to what extent do we have the right tools, the right information to support management, to help guide management? So that was that component. Then we got into talent oversight and CEO succession. Now that has become a big, big area of growth in terms of board governance, with a shortage of talent in the pipeline, particularly in the diversity area. There's tremendous interest on the part of boards to really focus on work with the CEO and saying, okay, do we have in the C-suite, do we have the pipeline, the talent, the resources, not based on the skill sets that they needed last time around, but based on the skill sets that you will be needing going forward with all of the changes in technology, disruptive competition, and everything that's going out. So it's a whole different conversation around talent and around CEO succession. The next bucket was strategy oversight, and of course, that is the critical component of a board. Do we have the right strategy? Do we need to adjust the strategy? What's working? What's not working? What other options do we have? A lot of those things relate to that component. And as importantly, risk management oversight. You know, do we know what are the things that are just lurking out there that we need to be aware of? So these are the 5 buckets, the 5 primary components that lead to exceptional governance. And so for each area, the board members were asked to rank and rate the survey statements on a dual scale. We had a scale on effectiveness, we had a scale on importance. The effectiveness scale ranged from 1 to 5, 1 being poor, 5 being outstanding, exceptional, excellent. And we had a 0. If you did not know or were not part of that particular, have expertise or knowledge about that particular statement, then you could put a 0. But those zeros were not weighted. So what was weighted in terms of effectiveness was the ratings that came from 1 to 5. And that was particularly designed to measure how well each board member evaluated the full board's performance for a given statement. And then we had the importance scale. The importance scale was, well, if this is effective, how much time is the board devoting to this particular issue? So the importance scale really rated the time that you as a board or as a committee was devoting to that particular area. And again, the ratings went from 1 to 5, with 0 not being weighted. And so what you see here is that in terms of board structure, if you can see, and the closer, by the way, I should say, the closer the rating between importance and effectiveness, the more effective is that particular area in which you're involved. So if it's a big gap, there are opportunities. If it's closer and it's above 3, 3 being good, 4 being great, and 5 being outstanding. So anything above 3 is a good practice, and you saw that as something that is well on its way, always opportunities for improvement. So what you see here is that there are 2 components under board structure, diversity and board evaluation, that received a high alignment between effectiveness and importance. At the same time, we had roles and responsibilities and board compensation that had the widest gap and received the lower alignment. The rest of the components somewhere in between. So the feedback and the key takeaways that we gathered from this process was that greater clarification of roles and responsibilities at all levels, and again, we're talking about the board, but that comment permeated across all 3 components, board, committee, and individual. So board role and responsibilities, committee roles and responsibilities, and individuals' roles and responsibility, as well as a better understanding between the role of the board vis-a-vis management. It's great appreciation, but needing more understanding. Okay, so what exactly do we do with respect to management? What is their role? So some clarification and better understanding of those responsibilities were expressed. There was a consistent comment about the importance of onboarding and board orientation, not as a one and done, but something that should be more durable in the process. And I think that comment came as a result of trying to get a better understanding of roles and responsibilities, and perhaps the onboarding process could be strengthened to do that. Also, some of the comments had to do with communication, access to management, The need for clarity, as I said earlier, around the relationship between management and the board. The difference between the board's role and management's role. In other words, consensus around, all around, about the desire to better understand the respective roles and responsibilities, and a recommendation, a suggestion that the onboarding could be extremely helpful to that end, as well as professional development and education. Similarly, board member compensation came up as a consistent concern, one needing a fresh look, particularly in this day and age when where there's so much more being expected and required of board members. Boards under a lot of scrutiny. You read every day in the paper what's going on, and I think that requires a lot more time and attention and care. And so with all that preparation being required to be truly on top of all that is going on the marketplace, and particularly within the public pension fund sector, many comments were expressed regarding the need to explore viable pathways that would lead to a more equitable compensation structure for all. The different ways in which compensation allocation is practiced was perceived to be somewhat detrimental to some and not as conducive to ensuring that appropriate time get devoted to meeting planning, preparation, and engagement. Leading practices throughout recognize the importance of taking the time, you're using your intellectual capital and your capacity for continuous learning and professional development. And I'll just wanted to, for the benefit of those who did not participate in the survey, and I think, Anne, we can make the questions in the survey available, for all the board members. But the question on board compensation, the statement, I should say, was the board is appropriately compensated for carrying out its responsibilities related to stakeholder engagement, continued professional development, education, meeting preparation, and participation. That got a 2.50, which is, again, is quite a significant gap along with the board, with the roles and responsibilities. There were a couple of other categories worth noting on this slide, and the committee structure and professional development. The comments in that area revolved around the need to review, to revisit committee structures and the charters and the composition to ensure better alignment with each other. How do they support and align with each other? And more clearly, again, delineate responsibilities and roles from each other as well as the full board. Also, there was a lot of comments about cybersecurity, some concerns about that and technology and risk. And should the committee be redesigned, should the committees be redesigned to place more focus on these areas? Questions, and I'll get into this a little later when we talk about committee structures, but in terms of roles and responsibilities, one question arose as to whether the timing is right to revisit the composition of the investment committee, and whether all committees should be composed equally and operate as a committee, as equal partners, rather than have a committee function as a full board committee. By definition, a committee is a subset of a full board. So there were a number of comments that identify the need to revisit that and to see whether in this day and age and where we are, whether that's something to be considered. And again, professional development as individual contributors, as well as how do you do the need for continuing education. Those were key. Do we ask questions or we go on? Okay. The next bucket that we talked about had to do with operational oversight. As you can see, board calendar and governing principles received a relatively high scoring, with onboarding, once again, and preparation for meetings receiving the lower ratings on this particular area. Some of the opportunities that were identified for improved governance included strengthening a fiduciary duty, ethics, and a code of conduct culture where board members can ensure that concerns over any breaches of confidentiality can be readily addressed. Look for a way to create an accountability mechanism and have a deliberative environment where members have the freedom to deliberate openly, with candor, and without fear of breaches. You know, a healthy culture is one that can be a unifying force, and that is built on trust and relationship building. Anything less than that can undermine and create risk. So there were some expressions about, well, how can we create this code of conduct that really will help bring us together as a unifying force in areas where we may have opportunities. In terms of meeting materials, given the volume of information that is required to read, review, reflect on everything that you receive on a monthly basis, feedback suggested perhaps considering ways to refine the materials so that you could more fully focus on the key strategic areas where the deliberations would take place, and perhaps have a way of prioritizing that to ensure that the information is readily accessible. And then the other thing was having management engage with the board on ways to deliver the materials for enhanced preparation. So how can we be better board members? Well, you know, how the materials are presented, what we consider to be the focus of the presentation, all of these components were consistently expressed as a way for you to be enhanced, because you're already highly effective board members, but more enhanced board members. Also, a number of expressed concerns as to, given the available technology that we have and other industry trends, whether this board should consider reducing the number of meetings and possibly supplementing them with other forms of updates. Typically, boards in general meet 5, top 6 times a year. And I think the fact that we have these updates and other types of ways to keep board members informed have really helped that process. So it's something for this board to consider. The next component had to do with talent oversight and CEO succession. And as you can see, this particular segment was rated good or better. And the scores seem to reflect a good overall balance between importance and effectiveness. There were a number of comments, and they revolved around the desire to devote more time to discussions around talent development. Many recognize the challenges that you have because you're competing with private sectors that can offer better salaries. Perhaps the logistics are better. And so they recognize the challenges that you face when you deal with some of these competitive forces. Compensation is a consideration as well. Turnover was identified as a concern, and there was a great desire on the part of many board members to discuss with management retention strategies. How can we, are there other things that we can do for purposes of retaining our key assets, strategic assets at CalPERS? But altogether, I think the board felt relatively satisfied, as you can see from the rankings, that there was a good process in place and that some improvements have been made. In terms of strategy oversight, again, the scores reflect a good balance between importance and effectiveness. Some of the discussion that we had revolved around the desire to allocate more time to strategic discussions. There seems to be an understanding that strategy development is a shared responsibility, that the board, by virtue of having to ultimately approve the strategy, is ultimately responsible, but that they have to collaborate and work closely with management in setting that strategy and to get snippets of the strategy along the way to make sure that they're still on track, if there are adjustments that needed to be made, to address that. So the whole issue of strategy and devoting time for strategic discussions was raised on multiple occasions through the feedback. I think that we all know what the current environment is with cybersecurity and technology, and we have climate change and other kinds of considerations. So there's a great mandate for increased accountability on the part of the board, more engagement with stakeholders, new areas of oversight and balancing between short-term results and long-term value. I think that's the unifying force here is the clear objective of this board is to sustain the long-term viability and value of this organization. But all of that really leads to the importance of strategy and strategic oversight. And so a leading practice in this area is continuous dialogue with management in making sure that the strategy is still on track given the external forces and dynamics. And finally, the fifth bucket and final competency relating to board structure is risk management. Again, as you can tell, the scores here seem to reflect a good balance between importance and effectiveness. Board members generally express satisfaction with, somewhat cautious concern with the oversight and management of risk. Concerns were expressed around the volatility of the market, cyber risk. Also, investment decisions and their foreseeable risk were mentioned as important considerations when assessing the organization's risk appetite. Again, from the board's perspective, it's their responsibility to understand the balance between the organization's strategy and risk and to assess the expected risks against the expected rewards and to provide oversight through a sound committee structure and ensure that management has a system in place to manage these risks. The next stage was the committee evaluations. As it relates to the committee evaluations, as you could see from the needle and the gauge, there seems to be overall good alignment between importance and effectiveness, with most of the ratings in this phase being good and above. The 3 rating, of course, being good. Some of the salient areas of interest and observations that came out of this category had to do with the use of consultants. When to use them, how to use them, and just conducting, perhaps a desire to conduct an overall evaluation of the use of consultants from fees to deliverables. It was just that came up quite a number of times in terms of we being as good, as effective as we can be with the use of consultants. Again, at the committee level, there was a lot of discussion around roles and responsibilities and the importance of regularly updating governance related to policies that came up on multiple occasions. Setting standards on how to more effectively use closed sessions. That was another point of discussion. Greater clarification on the purpose of a closed session, how we use closed sessions so as to make them more efficient, more effective, and more responsive to the reason why closed sessions exist. Given the value of information that was presented, the need for developing processes that would allow for more time to review and absorb information at the committee level. That was something that came up. We're faced with so much information, we really do need more time to absorb and process, reflect, and then contribute. Again, specifically, when we were looking at the committee evaluation, several observations were made about the investment committee and whether the time had arrived to revisit its composition. Again, because of its composition as operating as a full board and not as a subset of the board. Also, there was discussion about the importance of regular chair rotation and the clarification of roles in the chair, and whether, somebody holding a different type of role on the board should also serve as chair of a committee. So that whole discussion came up in your feedback. Those were some of the concerns and observations that came out of the committee evaluation that we believe are worthy of your attention. With respect to board attributes, your personal assessment, as you can see, there was strong movement toward the strongly agree. The attributes that were emphasized involved the importance of preparation, the importance of engaging and attentiveness at board meetings and at all levels of deliberation, and those were required as key contributors to a high-performing board. Similarly, attributes that were emphasized in our discussions involve collegiality, trust building, and relationship building, and creating an environment where everyone feels the freedom to speak openly without concerns over breaches of confidentiality. I think the beauty of this board is everybody agrees on the final destination. So the question is, what's the manner of traveling that we're going to take on as a board to get us there? And this was one of the consistent comments. How can we feel the freedom to speak openly and make sure that confidentiality, that trust and respect, mutual respect and confidentiality are observed. Open and frequent dialogue with management, speaking with a cohesive voice, and the importance of ongoing training and board development were also identified as important attributes for this board. And so, to summarize, CalPERS is really to be commended for its many strengths, which include the commitment to the CalPERS mission. That was so evident by all of you to really show that you care deeply about the direction, the future, and the mission of this organization. Great support for continued transparency and accountability. Those are some of the hallmarks that you have shown. You've led by example in that direction. Tremendous pride in the diversity of the board, not just diversity in terms of identity, personal characteristics, but diversity in terms of the expertise, the experiences that each one of you brings to this process at all levels of your background. There is a strong support, recognition of the stakeholder engagement. That was one of the highest ranked comments that we read and received, that to you, stakeholder engagement is pivotal to the success of this organization, and that you do practice what you preach, and it's very evident as a strength that you have as a board. And you also express a great desire to just build on your strength for continuous improvement. Okay, we're here, how do we get to the next level? And I believe that the recommendations, the thoughts, and the feedback that you offered really showed a lot of the thought that you gave to this area. So you do have tremendous desire to continue to improve as individuals, as committee members, as well as full board members. In terms of the opportunities which, based on your feedback, we see as critical to enhance performance and ultimately lead to long-term value, and which NACD recommends that you factor for consideration in an action plan. We have quite a few, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. But certainly role clarification and responsibilities at all levels of governance, as well as vis-a-vis the role of management versus the role of the board. That came out loud and clear. Developing a richer and ongoing board orientation program for new board members, for existing board members. You can be on a board. I've been on a board for many, many years, but if I rely on what I learned 10 years ago, I would be totally inept and ineffective in my position. It's an ongoing, constant educational process that has to take place. Develop more curriculum to further strengthen the skills and expertise that each one of you brings. That was another perspective. We want to be better. So what can we do, and what do we have out there that exists within the organization, outside of the organization, that could make us better as board members? Again, explore equitable allocation of remunerated board time. The amount of time that is required of you on top of everything else that you do is really, significant, very impressive. So how do you make sure that from a fairness perspective, from being equitable and respecting and valuing what it is that you do, is there a way that can be addressed, that we can address a more equitable allocation of remunerated board time? I think it's an important component that should be looked at and considered. Refining meeting materials to prioritize for deliberation. I covered that. I think it's important to enable the board members to really focus on the key things that are going to be important. You're probably doing that already. So perhaps there may be other tools that you can use to make it even more apparent and more refined. Review the calendar and format for board meetings, frequency of meetings, those types of things. Do we really need them? Is that going to drive us to higher performance, or is it going to take away from higher performance? The format for board meetings and the focus important. Again, reviewing the committee structures and charters, the composition. And in this day and age, all kinds of questions came up. Do we really need the same committees? Should we look at technology? A lot of boards are now creating committees on technology, cyber risk, and the kinds of things, disruptive competition that many boards are facing. So some of the older structures may not necessarily be conducive to the new issues and challenges that face you out there. The role of board consultants, we understand, and consultants are essential to bring a certain perspective, independent perspective, to all you do at the committee levels. But it's important to make sure that the deliverables and the process is meeting your needs and satisfying to all of you. And finally, developing a board of conduct, and that came across loud and clear, how important it is to create and establish mechanisms of accountability that would certainly prevent breaches of confidentiality, that would certainly enhance the candor and openness with which you deliberate. There's a lot that you can provide, but you have to feel that is a kind of a trusting environment, which I believe exists. But look for that code of conduct so that everybody understands their roles, responsibilities, and expectations as a board member. Okay, well, those are it. We thank you for the opportunity to work with you. It's a critically important work. We hope that you continue to access all of the resources that you have available, research information, all kinds of training tools that NACD as a member you have available, and that as active members of NACD that really help some of the things that we've talked about. And let me just say that I believe you have a very unique opportunity to effect lasting change for the benefit of the people that you represent, the stakeholders, your beneficiaries, and also for the long-term future of this organization. We stand ready to support you and to provide whatever support, materials, guidance, counsel you might need. But we hope that we use this as a call to action because I think this is a call to action. As I said, all the stars have aligned with the new year and new board and new leadership, and all the stars have aligned. And we hope that you use this as a call to action to build on the great successes you already have, to strengthen your governance, and to continue to be the leader that you are in the public sector fund world as well as throughout, because it goes beyond that. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was an outstanding presentation, and we really appreciate it. And the item up there is next steps, and I'm going to make some comments about next steps. But first of all, we want to engage my colleagues to see what comments, questions you may have, and so then we'll talk about next steps. David?
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciated the opportunity to participate in this process. It seemed very well thought out, very well executed, very comprehensive, and I appreciate the work that you and the staff at CalPERS and NACD did to pull this together. So that's first off. I was just curious, in your very first slide or two, you highlighted a few things, including board compensation, and I'm wondering how did you come to, well, the balance between the delta between effectiveness and importance versus the absolute value for the effectiveness? Because, for example, it seemed like leadership, there was a greater delta, although the effectiveness number was just a bit lower than, for example, the board compensation, where the delta, the difference between them was narrower, but the actual effectiveness, level was a bit lower.
Thank you for that question. And by the way, I appreciate the accommodation I received, because I was shoveling snow and I threw my back out, so I can't sit too long. But I very much appreciate this accommodation to stand up and respond. I think that when you're dealing with summary information, sometimes the average doesn't always reflect the delta and the changes. But in terms of the specific feedback, I think a lot of it had to do with some of the retention challenges that have taken place, and trying to create some stability. I think we made a lot of progress along those lines, but I think some of the feedback really revolved around, well, we've had so much change and so much churning, and so that was an area where the effectiveness said, okay, going forward, but the history was more of what had transpired in the past.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we talk about next? Yeah, Jason?
Thank you. I don't know, excuse me, I don't know when you refer to the next steps, are we laying out like a roadmap on how to get to where the board should be, but where
right.
we all envision
okay.
the board should be?
Yeah, what I had in mind there, it kind of reminds me of when I was the investment committee chair in 2013, and we have a set of investment beliefs, and we started that process similar to this. We was just information gathering and unpacking all the different information about what we would like to have as our values for our beliefs going forward. So what I did then is set up a working group of board members to work with staff to go through, because I think initially we had like maybe 50 investment beliefs that were downloaded on us, and you can't deal with that. So the working group and the staff worked about 18 months to come up with those 10 beliefs that we now have. So that's my thought about this, is to use a similar approach to have board members work with staff to deliver, find that travel lane that she's talking about to get to the ultimate, what are the items we're going to have as our governance policy that we can go forward and use to enhance and improve the board governance structure.
And with complete respect and deference to your time on the board here, 18 months is a long time. I think we, from my point of view, I think we need to strike while the iron's hot, and while we're all individuals and all professionals, our emotions are already wrapped up in this. So I think now would be a good time just to
and I agree. I was sharing with you what we did.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's what we did to get to the because I could see my goal now is to have this working group and staff come back at the July offsite and give an update and allow board members to give feedback as to where we go from there this July.
As a board, is that something we can just kind of hammer out now?
No, it's too much information. You got to dig into the details, and I mean you can make your comments. Yeah, right now, make any comments. So, but I think you need a group to bring those together to come back to the full board and continue to debate it, or discuss it. Yeah, but you could make any comments you want now. So we'll take that information.
I see Mr. Slayton's ready to say something, so let me take a break and
Okay.
maybe minimize my comments.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think you've raised a very interesting issue, which is the time about this, and I'll get to that in a moment. I do want to thank you for this work. I think one of the things that we'll have to wrestle with is this is a snapshot in time, and I like the way this is formatted and the issues that are addressed that give us a chance, a platform to then take off of to start working on. One of the things that will be, I think, of significant value is if we're able to do this 2 years from now, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, and you start to see the trend lines. So you start to then see where you're improving or not improving, because all we have is a single snapshot here. And when you start to see more of it, then you start to see where you're making progress or not making progress. But to address the specific point of the timing, I think the working group concept is very good in this, because this gets into a lot of nuance that, you know, you can't sit here as 13 people and wrestle it in the moment. But I do think that we could put on agendas before July as the working groups come forward, because one of the things that came out of doing the investment belief, all the beliefs that we did, is we did periodic check-in with the full board to see what the reaction was. And then the working group might go back and then refine things. So I would encourage us to put it in pieces that are, you know, obtainable to get interim results shorter than waiting until next July, if it's possible. Because we come together, there's time when we can allocate some time to this on a specific aspect of this and maybe make some progress and start getting closer to what you're talking about, which is the time is right. Let's try to make some progress and get some changes implemented.
Right. Yeah, Betty?
Thanks, Henry. I also want to just add my thanks about the breadth of the work that was undertaken here. It's given us a lot of insight, I think. I think the way that I've kind of looked at this is, now that we have had an opportunity to provide input and to have these opportunities identified, is to look at how we can maybe group these into kind of work group subject matters. One of the things that I think is critical is that this isn't a once-a-year exercise, or that we don't continue to look at how we continue to do our work more effectively together and as individual board members. And so I would hope that out of today we could begin to identify what those groups might be out of the list of opportunities. I know I have particular interests in a couple of them, and see how much progress we can make leading up to then, I hope, at the July offsite, maybe a set of preliminary recommendations about where we go. I think some of the, with things that are so quickly evolving and constantly changing, and certainly with recognition of the new board members who have joined us, I think this is a way to also engage their participation at this point too. And I think we've got, and Henry, you've alluded to kind of some past efforts that could inform us in terms of how we move forward, but I do think time is critical here. And just even the simple decision about, who's going to constitute the investment committee is a critical one that I think we need to come to grips with.
Teresa?
I wanted to thank Kerry and Ann for moving this forward. I've only been here for one other board self-evaluation. This is by far superior. It's much more in-depth. Gave us some really good information so that we can do some next steps, which I don't think we ever had before. And I will say I agree with Controller Yee that we need to, map this out now as we move into instituting or exploring instituting some of these changes that may need to be made, whether that's, one work group, a couple of work groups, however that's going to work. I just want everybody to be aware this is kind of a governance issue, so, when it gets brought back, should be something the governance committee, takes up in terms of voting, once we get the recommendations in terms of voting it through and stuff like that. But I think it's very important, the timing is an issue that we don't spend, because I don't want to be at the next evaluation and not have implemented anything. So I think it's real important that we do expedite the work and get it done. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Oh, yeah, Jason.
Hearing the way you guys explain it, yes, for some of the technical fixes, absolutely. But there's an elephant in the room, and I'm hesitant to say it because it's open session, but there's an obvious lack of trust and even anxiety or animosity between board members. And if we're to move forward at anything as a team, it broke me, and I'm going to call Dana later, it broke my heart to hear Dana say that we all have our own factions and we all have our own agendas. I respectfully disagree. We have one goal, and that's to provide the benefits to the members. And that's what we all need to come together as a team. There's 13 of us. And I don't know, because of the constraints of the law, we can't have team building. I wouldn't consider this offsite team building, but we definitely need to grow and start to know each other individually so we can relate to each other, learn how to communicate with each other and our different styles. I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't even introduced myself to Ms. Jenkins-Jones. But at the same time, I sent a friend request on Facebook to Teresa, and she accepted. And that's, the limited ability that we have to learn about each other. So, yeah, the technical fixes, we should roll those out as y'all see fit. But the model of the way, the leadership, that's the stuff that we need to do yesterday.
Okay. Well, maybe, and I'd like to have Kerry also to chime in. One way maybe to get started is to have each member kind of, these opportunities here, what are your two highest priorities, and we can kind of begin to focus our time and effort on what we hear in terms of direction from the whole committee, the whole board. Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
No.
why don't you do that, go through that process then, Kerry? Trying to get that, go through that process of getting to have us identify the one or two, each of us, so that we could then, what's important, so we can begin to see how they come out. And maybe we don't do all of them right away, maybe we do 4 or 5. So this will help us concentrate our time and effort by getting a feedback from us all.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, absolutely. And in terms of priorities, some of them, may not require a long time to put in place. So those could be run in tandem with the ones that are going to take a little longer. You mentioned the whole code of conduct and the ethics and the confidentiality. So that is a cultural thing. That may take a little longer to put together the systems and the policies and the relationships in place that will help. But if we look at the list, and by the way, I wanted to mention Ms. Taylor's comment about best practices out there. Oftentimes, the Nom and Governance Committee of a board will put together an action plan pulling from different board members and their interests. It's not an exclusive type of thing, but certainly they do have the main responsibility of guiding the process for full board action. So that's one option that you can consider. But if we look, what I like to do, if I may, Mr. President Jones, I would just like to get feedback from all of you in terms of if you were to prioritize this list, and there's no right or wrong here. It's what do you think is really, some of you have been on the board for a long time, others are new. What do you think would really enable and help you become enhancers of your performance? Because that's the goal of this effort. This is a tool. The evaluation is a tool, but the purpose of it is to share what you think would really help you be the best board member possible, and what kind of an environment you want to create. So if I could just get some feedback in terms of what you consider to be at the top of your list. Do I?
Just while people are gathering their thoughts, perhaps I could just build on what Kerry is suggesting, which is to prioritize. Like, what do we do first? What can be done together? What can work on in parallel? And I was very struck by Controller Yee saying that we could bucket these issues, and I just wanted to suggest the areas that I think they fall into. I wish I had one of those little Sharpie pens. You remember in the good old days, you'd put something on a slide and you could draw on it? I need a bit of technology for that. So just bear with me. It seems to me that the first 3 bullet points all hang together. Clarify roles and responsibilities. That means we need more understanding. And then developing a richer and ongoing board orientation program and developing board curriculum. This is all about strengthening the skills and the experience and the understanding of the board. And that seems to me to be one project, to look at all the education that's available, what we need to develop that's new, to build, if you like, a CalPERS curriculum. What do you need to know about this organization, the role of the board, the role of the committees, the role of the staff, and the consultants? So that feels like one project. The next issue is simple, but really complicated at the same time. The reason that board members have very different allocation of remunerated board time is because of the appointments and election structure for board members. So we could say, this really matters. It's been raised by so many of you. That's what Kerry heard. But unraveling it and finding a better way forwards could be quite a big project, could involve a lot of external parties. So I think that's something in its own right for the board to think about, whether they would want to devote the time and attention now or later, and be realistic about how long it would take. The next 3 bullet points seem to me to all belong together. And it's all about thinking about housekeeping. Like, when does the board meet? What kind of material do you get? And yesterday, you heard from Tim and Doug and myself about this exciting new technology project. But the issue of the materials, the calendar, the format for board meetings, and the committee structures, to me, those three could go together. You may want to peel out the committee structures because there's a lot to it, but if you want it, you know, bundles, I think I'd bundle those. Then I think reviewing the role of board consultants, there has just been a survey on that, and if it's still an issue to look into, I think it could be a separate project. And again, is it the first thing to do? Is it something that would take time? Can it be wrapped into the normal annual review of the consultants and so forth? And then the final item, I think, speaks very much to Mr. Perez's comment about team building and a culture. There are various venerable documents at CalPERS that touch on this. In fact, our General Counsel shared one, blew off the dust from some time ago, which has some wonderful stuff in it. But I think for the board to come together to develop its own board of conduct could be a very important project. But that seems to me to be something separate. So if this helps, rather than having the 9 things that have arose, that came out, there's a whole project around building understanding, education, that's the top 3. There's the issue of remunerated time. Then there are 3 issues about the committees, who sits on them, how often does the board meet, materials. Then there's the consultants, and then I think there's the board code of conduct. So Kerry, I don't know if that feels like a more manageable bundling of the issues on which to take the temperature with board members about, I don't know how our president would like to do this. We do a forced ranking over a coffee break.
I don't know about a forced
or everybody
ranking.
gets a chance to pick their favorite 3.
Yeah, Betty.
But that's my
Okay.
suggestion.
Betty.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Anne. I think that's I think that's a good attempt. I guess for me, when there are questions about our roles and responsibilities, that just rises to the top for me, and everything else kind of emanates from that. And so what I think is really a priority is this clarification of roles and responsibilities at each level of governance. And you know, after having been here now for 4 years, I think there's some interesting conversations that can happen around this in terms of how are those roles defined? Have they been predefined? Have they evolved? And I would put with that reviewing the role of our board consultants, because this is all about how we carry our role in the most effective way. So I would kind of put those 2 together. The second set really is about kind of skills building and development at various stages of our service as board members. So whether the ongoing board orientation is something that we are going to be getting at different time intervals during our service on the board. The board curriculum, we can talk about what that looks like in terms of another avenue to strengthen our skills and expertise. The committee structure, all these kind of things related to meeting management, committee structure, all of that, to me is a premature discussion to have until we understand the governance. Otherwise, it's just really arbitrary rules that don't really respond to, I think, how we view our responsibility. And so I would put that kind of as a 3rd tier. And then the development of a board code of conduct, I think that's something that can just be started now. First and foremost, seeing what other boards do that are like as close to CalPERS as possible. But so I think they don't need to be taken necessarily on in a linear fashion, but I do feel a high priority with respect to clarifying our roles and responsibilities and really understanding the governance and what that means, that we certainly own our responsibility and role in that. What are the tools that are available to enhance our effectiveness in governance, and then more importantly, understanding the governance with respect to the overall organization. So I think I have a good sense of it, but when I see it on paper, I do have questions about what that means going forward, and so that's how I would kind of approach it.
Yeah, oh, uh, Ramon?
Thank you, Mr. President. I too want to thank everybody for the other responsible parties for this overview. I think it's very concise, and I can see my comments reflected here, so I appreciate that. I appreciate on the opportunities how they were listed. I do agree with many of the comments board members saying that roles responsibility clearly is key, and I just want to remind everybody that one of the things that flows from being on this board is the whole sense of fiduciary responsibility, and that will be later on the agenda. So I think that should also sort of guide our discussion, because I think that duty would fit into many of these items. So I would think we have that in mind as we decide how to move forward on these. But I do agree that we should give input, but I think we have subject matter experts here that can guide us in the process, and I would agree with the bundling.
Okay.
Yeah, as amended by Betty. I think that's good. Thank you.
Teresa?
So again, I appreciate the thinking behind the bundling, Ann. And I kind of agree with Betty on her idea, because when I was looking at this initially, I thought clarifying our roles and responsibilities at each level of our governance is really, really important. And I do see that as part and parcel of the rest of the work. I will say that the refining of meeting materials, review calendar and format for board meetings, I think we're kind of there on the Insight project, right? So that's kind of the Insight project, I think. So that's already been being worked on. And then finally, developing a code of conduct, I believe, is incredibly important. We did unveil some, I think it was UC Regents codes of conduct, and if there is a violation of the conduct, et cetera, how that is addressed. And one of the things that we have to understand is that we are a board of appointed and elected officials, and the elected officials cannot be removed from this board by law. So you could be in jail and still be on the board. So I think there's some very specific discussions that need to go on around that, and that would be with our chief counsel and, you know, other ideas if there were violations of codes of conduct that we've been experiencing recently. So I think that's why that has to be kind of really deeply delved into, because we have looked at it, we've adopted some new rules, but it hasn't really accomplished anything. So I think we may need to look into it a little deeper. So that's my view on that, personally. And other than that, I think I agree with Betty and her.
Bundling, okay. David?
Yeah, thank you. In listening to everything, in particular to Ms. Yee, what struck me is it's not just a matter of kind of grouping, like the affinity, what's like, what's apples and oranges. It's really kind of multi-dimensional, and it seems to me that the way we kind of, I don't even like the word prioritize, because I don't see anything there to kind of push off and not do in favor of other things. But I think in terms of looking at how do we stage and deploy this stuff, thinking about it simply as possible to me is kind of two dimensions. You know, the importance, the impact, I think is a better word to me, of addressing a particular topic or basket or book of work, and then kind of the doability or complexity, and that's where you hit that, you know, the sequencing, what needs to be done first, how long will it take, what can we do, you know, what could we do, you know, over lunch today versus what would require us to go back to the legislature and the governor and have a constitutional change or resources. The complexity kind of gets into that. And so I think either of the kind of bucketing that was proposed, you know, it kind of fits that way of thinking about them. And I think what Betty has mentioned is a little closer to my thinking about how they would fall out. But I think that kind of framework allows us to kind of all look at it from kind of the same sorting process. So just as a suggestion.
Okay. Bill?
Thank you. You know, I was thinking here as Teresa was talking, I know you and I have disagreed from time to time on policy issues, and sometimes we agree. In this particular case, I agree. And so I think that I just want to expand on it a little bit. So I think the roles and responsibility, as Controller Yee said, is critical. That, you know, it goes to the heart of what we do as an organization. The second one that I would put next is, and I would not call it a code of conduct, it's a code of trust. That's really what that is the grease that makes this work, is our ability to have trust in each other, trust with between us and the staff, and trust between all of us and our stakeholders. That's what can make this organization even more successful than it is if we focus on that. So to me, that's where I think the right word is, and you know, we can play with that, but that's what I think should be emphasized. I think the meeting materials, I agree, the insight is the vehicle. I think that there is some work to be done with staff, and maybe that's a working group to work on that, to refine it, to make sure it's going to be as effective as possible as a tool for all of us to use, staff and board. And then the last one, which I do think should be included and worked on, it's not as important that it move as quickly, but I think ultimately we probably do need to look at revision of our committee structures and composition. And that doesn't have to be, that's not an urgent thing to be done, but in terms of the way we look at things, maybe that's something that should be worked on so that next year it can be implemented. Because we're going to start in February with our committee structure. So, you know, for us to try to wrestle with that right now midstream, I think creates its own challenges. So I think that one can take a longer approach to making that happen with an idea that it would be effective next year. But I think these others, starting with that roles and responsibilities, and by the way, I do think the consultant role can be wrapped into that as well.
Okay. You want to come back, Jason? No?
Sit you off.
I don't want to say prioritize because I don't want David to thump me, but if I had to triage this, if we're bleeding out, I'm not suggesting we are, but if we had to triage this, a quick search in the Bible app will show you that there's numerous examples of building a foundation on rock, and that's where we need to start. And that rock is trust and the ability to work through issues, to be able to have open conversations like this is great. I'm encouraged by the ability to have these conversations. And then I think second, and Mr. Slayton hit on it, would be the transparency and trust and true engagement with stakeholders, shareholders, stakeholders. The public, the cities, the counties, taxpayers in general. Thank you.
Yeah, Frank first and then Teresa.
Bring the new kid on the block, being first day of school, so to speak, feeling I want to limit my comment to say that, yes, I agree with everything that's been said, and I like the idea that we adding trust to the code of conduct, although I refuse to believe that there is not a code of conduct. You know, we should have some sort of a principle, and I'm sure they are. We just have to kind of put them together. But I would add another word in that, and that's respect. Respect each other because we're coming from different perspective, and there's a reason why we all sort of I don't know the history, the composition, but there's a reason why the legislature, they have governor appointees, the speaker, the assembly, because everybody brings a different perspective. So although I don't want to speak for Ms. Ollinger, I don't know, but I think what she may have in mind is the idea that we all have a different perspective. Even for myself, I need to understand what this new role is. In my heart, I'm a state employee. I've been a state employee all my life, but I recognize that my role here is going to be different, that bringing the state employee perspective. I need to learn from a treasurer perspective, from the state treasurer, how that affects everybody, and not just state employee, not just the retiree, taxpayers, everyone. So I need to adjust, and I need to learn the role that, which is greater. And so in the mix, absolutely, you need trust and team building, but respect and recognize that at times, the different perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or wrong, but that is what we're here for, to advocate, to be guardians of these ideas, of different ideas, and then come together. It's a noble goal, and it's very hard to achieve, but you cannot achieve without trust, without respect, and without having some ground rules that we can all agree. So in this process, and that's the way what I looked at code of conduct, is sort of some ground rules that help us to understand the expectation, the behavior that either strengthens the team or weakens the team, and consequences for violating those rules, consequences for not adhere to. So the debate has to happen during, when we come up with these. And then once we all sign in, so to speak, then we have to hold each other accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. President, sorry.
Teresa?
Thank you. I just wanted to add one thing, and thank you, Bill. Yeah, you and I have, I think, going on what Frank says, you have your perspective based on your role, and I have my perspective based on my role. So I think respecting that. But what we all have in common is what Jason said, which is we are here to make sure our members get their retirement. And that is our main goal, regardless of who appointed us or who elected us. But then again, I also wanted, and I just wanted to acknowledge that, Frank, thank you very much. One thing I'm missing in here that I asked for, and it was just me, but I think maybe it's in here that it's just not spelled out, which is the developing board curriculum to further strengthen skills and expertise. And I think that also includes leadership skills. We are leaders, and we need training, I think, on leadership skills. That's incredibly important, and my organization considers that the most important thing to do is training leaders. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. Okay, and you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Just a comment, and
Okay.
to your point, that certainly is in that, because I think you cannot function without leadership of each individual. I have a very brief definition of leadership at any level. I think a leader envisions an opportunity, inspires belief, which for you is to make sure that your beneficiaries get what they deserve, rallies support around that common, and then delivers the results. I mean, that's what board leadership is about. And board leadership and management leadership, it's all about that moving in a unifying force in the same direction. And President Jones, you asked me about my comments, and I really appreciated hearing the rest of the feedback. I agree from NACD's perspective. I think there was an intentional approach to putting clarification of roles first, and then developing a board code of conduct last, because we see them as bookends. Everything else falls in the middle of that. So you can't do a board orientation, you can't refine materials unless every individual understands his and her roles and responsibilities and operates in the environment that is conducive to deliberation, to mutual respect, as has been expressed. So I think those two are bookends, and I appreciated Anne's comments, because you can, put them in different categories. But first and foremost, everybody has to, from NACD's perspective and the hundreds and hundreds of evaluations we've done, we have to start with what's the most important for a board, and that's understanding board, committee, individual, and relationship with management, because that's crucial. we've got to factor that in any type of conducive, constructive partnership towards your shared objectives. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hearing all of the comments, which are all great, and I know we have to still move to the next step after hearing all of this. We can't just stop. But I also subscribe to the bucket concept, if you will, to try to categorize these. And so my suggestion is that we will attempt to categorize these maybe in 3 buckets or so. And even if you have, like the first item, clarify roles and responsibilities, and you have the next 2 in that same bucket, but if we have a couple of people as a working group with staff, then they could prioritize within, because this is the high level. It's a lot of information below these items, and we don't have all of that before us here, and that's why we can't deal with them in terms of some kind of finality. So we have to unpack this to make sure that we get the details that are below these items. So what I would suggest then is that we attempt to go ahead and Ann and with Buck, you've heard the comments, to create some kind of maybe 3 buckets out of these items. And that doesn't mean that we're going to wait till those items up here start before we work on others. We'll be working on them at the same time. And what I would suggest that each of you let me know which bucket you like to participate in, and then we will put a couple members of the board to work with staff on that bucket, and that way we can move these forward at the same time, and then we have a more robust reporting system back to the full committee as we go forward. So that sound like a plan? Okay, that's what we do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for all the input.
Oh yeah. Jason.
I just wanted to finish with...
Wait just a minute.
Oh, I am so
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Britt.
Thank you, Henry, and I really appreciate the discussion that we're having this morning. I guess I still want to, put some boundaries on it with respect to time.
Time?
Time, right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, knowing that we're going to be developing these work groups, but when can we expect that we're coming back together to just kind of see some progress?
Well, we could schedule a governance committee as soon as we have committee assignments, and that's even though the full board could participate in that governance committee, and that's maybe the first update is that at the first governance committee. That could be in March, I think.
Okay.
March.
Okay.
And then we'll have a full-blown discussion like this at the offsite.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, well, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Okay, well, thank you again for this wonderful report. And as you can see, there's a lot of interest in moving forward with this, and so we appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
President Jones, just wanted to also leave you the NACD resources that they're all available to you.
Okay, let's give them a big hand. That's great. Okay, so now we have, I guess we have a break or something, don't we, at time-wise?
We do have a break, Henry, thank you. We're going to break for 15 minutes. We'll adjourn back here at 10:55. Thank you.